Welcome to From the Chalkface from EduPulse. Well, hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody who's listening to the EduPulse podcast from around the world, from people we've got over in Hawaii. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you, all the way through to our regular listeners in the UK. We're back. This is From the Chalkface. My name's Chris. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and wherever you're listening to us, you're able to just switch off for the next 45 minutes and listen to a really expert voice from the Chalkface within education in the UK. Mr. Kohlbeck, how are you?
Yeah, good, really good. And hello to our listener in Norway as well, because we had a listener in Norway a few weeks ago, didn't we? So hopefully they're still clinging on.
Clinging on, waiting to hear the next big thing. So, Adam, when you messaged me and said we've got this next guest on our podcast, I was really, really excited because we've been chatting about this guest for quite a while, just in terms of opinions that he kind of throws out on social media, and we talk about them all the time. I think we've even messaged him on coaching. Messaged him and spoken about him on Coaching Unpacked, and spoken about some of the thoughts that he's thrown our way and made us think a lot harder. So I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce our guest from the Chalkface today.
Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So when we started Coaching Unpacked, one of the things that we wanted to do at the end of each episode, or throughout each episode actually, was to have anybody that was listening send in what ifs. So, okay, so you've proposed this part of a coaching conversation could run in this way, but what if this, or what about that? And so basically to try and encourage more and more people to give us those pushes and nudges to really critique our own thinking. And this guest that we've got on tonight was one of the first people that did that. And we were super grateful at the time, and also super grateful for all of the pushes that he's given our thinking since. So welcome, Mr. Adam Robbins.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks very much for joining us and for coming on. So we're gonna get into, well, we're basically gonna have like 45 minutes of like getting into the depths of coaching, right? So we're gonna look at all of the different, or some of the different aspects of the debate and the discourse around coaching. But before we get into that though, can we start off in the traditional EduPulse way, with you just telling us and telling everyone that's listening a little bit about you, a bit about your story, how you got to where you are, what are the kind of key moments and key contours of your professional existence that have led you to here?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Adam. I'm a science teacher. I've been a science teacher for a long time, since 2003. I think I first started teaching. I never wanted to be a teacher growing up. I wanted to be a hairdresser, and then a geneticist. And I was a bad geneticist. So I'm one of the people that became a teacher because the government gave out free money to teach, essentially. And what an investment that was for the government, because I've now done nearly 22 years working in a coastal comprehensive in the sunny Bognor Regis area, serving a mixed community that has a broad range of needs. And while maybe not the ethnic diversity of the city, definitely a diversity of kind of privilege and class. So that's kind of me, really. What else has happened? I was a head of department for a long time, about 7 or 8 years, through the transition from the Labour government through to the Conservative government. So I went through all those large-scale reforms in secondary. I have been a coach in various different forms of what that word has been over the years, because I'm currently finishing, I think, my third coaching qualification. They're all different, but they all basically say the same thing. I think one of the most important things that happened to me was during lockdown. I was essentially helping our deputy head teacher to run the key worker school, because I was very local to our school, and I think that gave me a much broader appreciation for the kind of difference between middle leaders and senior leaders and the different worlds they mix in, which kind of resulted in the Middle Leadership Mastery book that kind of came from that. And that's really kind of propelled me in having lots of different opportunities to travel the world and, work in schools in Brazil and places like this, which was fantastic. Wow. And kind of visit schools around the country and try and support them in their journey. That's what I do. I teach 4 days a week, and then one day a week I visit other schools and try and help them out, basically.
It's really impressive. And before I ask you what makes a bad geneticist, because that really piqued my interest, you've also just had Unlocking Teacher Development be released as well, which did really, really well and spun around on social media with people with their heads kind of spinning 360, kind of going, this is super, super helpful. As well as you contributing to numerous carousel learning books as well. So you've definitely made your mark. And we'll pop a link in for all of your books into the script of the show. But I'm just interested, what makes a bad geneticist, Adam?
So the school I went to, which was the school I began working at when I first qualified, it wasn't very good. And when I left school and went to university, I really didn't know how to learn. There was nothing, because we were like in the top set of a school that was very, very challenging with multiple behavior issues and things like this, and staff working really, really hard to survive. We just kind of left to our own devices. And I know lots of people at the same period of time will talk about their schooling and just be like, yeah, if you were the top set, you could basically just, as long as you weren't causing trouble, and you were getting a grade that was okay. There was very little accountability at the time, and they were just like, this is fine. So I went to university, and essentially my literacy level was really, really low, which is not great when you're first having to kind of work independently and read scientific journals and things. And I didn't really find out until I became a teacher and went back to the school. And the Senko was visiting my lesson and basically was like, did you ever get any help while you were at school? Because your reading and writing is atrocious. But I come from a family of actual proper dyslexics, so I'm the academic one in my family, and it turned out my reading age was about 15 at the time, so I had to kind of. But when you start teaching, you learn so much. Like now, probably read at least a 17-year-old level, because I spent so many years like reading. The fact I've like written books and that is a small miracle, especially the most recent one, because it was completely self-published. So apart from paying for a copy editor, I like wrote it, designed it, got it printed, did everything, typeset it, the world. So I was really chuffed when that came out, and people thought it was quite good because it was a real passion project. It was kind of done a bit on a whim, in a kind of a 3, 4, 5 month window, and that was all I had from like conception to writing to publishing. So it was a real cool experience.
I
love that. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, it's fantastic as well, and I think it's great that I think this is what comes across a lot on your X feed when people follow you as well, and it's quite clear that you have a lot of credibility because you are walking the walk and doing all of this stuff in your own school day in, day out, and you are always very conscious of going. I've seen some of the stuff you put on Twitter around, okay, but how does that actually look in practice, and actually how much value does that idea have in practice? And I guess one of those ideas that comes up a lot is this idea or this concept of coaching, but within the professional development space. So within the conversation around it, there's a lot of disagreement around what coaching is and what coaching isn't. So first sort of big question we've got for you is, what is coaching? And as a bit of a follow-up to that, I guess, does it really matter if we don't have a complete agreement on the definition of coaching across the sector?
Yeah, I go backwards and forwards on the second part of it quite a lot. I don't think anyone can really define a key component of what coaching is apart from helping now. Yeah. Like my background for about 17, 18 years, I was a basketball coach as well, like in my free time, and it was a big part of my life. And it's funny how much of like the science of learning is directly applicable to sports coaching that has been around for 50, 60, 70 years, and was never applied in the classroom outside of PE lessons, it seems. Although no one of those PE teachers always got made into SLT all the time, because they were clearly steps ahead of the rest of us. So yeah, I think the problem we have with coaching now is coaching is a word that on its own doesn't have much meaning apart from I am helping you. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, because as long as people modify the term and say, I am an instructional coach, or I am, I had to like invent terms when I was trying to explain it in the book, because I came up with this term pure coaching, and I went to a friend of mine who's a very, very, very experienced and effective, like executive coach or whatever, kind of leadership coach, all those kind of like open coaching approach. And he was like, no, you just call it coaching, because it is coaching and everything else is a lie. He's very passionate about that. And I was like, but that's not very helpful for everyone else, because, we have a kind of, and then Josh Goodrich at Step Lab kind of tried to modify kind of Step Lab's instructional coaching process in the book Responsive Coaching. You guys have got the phrase cognitive coaching, which I think is a really solid model and things like that as well. But if I want to have a conversation with someone, it's a bit like what we talk about with teaching. We talk about codifying principles so that teachers can have effective conversations. We can't currently have that conversation about coaching, because people will say sentences like, when I used to coach, the first thing I used to do is give 3 praise points and then tell the person what they could do to improve. And other people will be screaming at the screen going, that's not the job of a coach. They'll be like, because you haven't asked any questions, and that's what they think, coaching is supposed to be about. So I think we're in a point in time now where, probably due to, like, it seems like in any system, what you have is you have no defining features, and you have this big amorphous blob, and then you try to understand that blob, and in doing that you break it up into lots of little parts and try and define those parts, and then you hope to get to a point where you have like a spectrum essentially that is clearly defined, and people are able to kind of identify where they sit on that, but understand that the shades of gray exist. But before those shades of gray exist, you kind of have to make your main silos, and identify them, because that's just kind of how society goes around, like creating structure, I think, sometimes. And I imagine we're in that kind of situation where the differences in education and the word coaching is, there are some incredibly vested interests in that word, some large, corporate interests that they're, you've got, walkthroughs have now got their coaching model. I haven't had the opportunity to look at the book or anything, so I can't comment on it. But they define this thing called group coaching, I believe, from a kind of conversation with Tom. And is that group coaching that much different to what some person might call department CPD? Is it, what defines it to be called coaching? What gives it that property, apart from that's a really cool word, and that's a word that people really like to hear. So I will put that word in my group session. Instead of calling it a group CPD session, I'll call it group coaching. But the actual context of the process I went through may not be any different to those two people. So I think that's the real problem we face right now. I don't think it's a big problem, because at the end of the day, as long as teachers are getting better, proof of the pudding is in the eating. I actually think there's a much bigger problem in the profession, and that is, I think we probably massively overestimate the number of people that actually are capable of diagnosing and effectively delivering change. And I think that, that is really challenging, because therefore people are in the role of improving others throughout their school, but they might not actually have the skills necessary to do that at a really effective level. And then that school will potentially, it's like, driving with the brakes on, because their person that's trying to level up everyone in their school is not quite good enough at finding the right leverage points or the right improvement targets, or, having the right direction on those things.
I think that's a really interesting point, because my teaching career, I started as a peripatetic music teacher, and I would go into schools and I'd be PPA cover, while the teacher was stapling into the wall, and we were with djembes and clarinets and things, and they would use the music cover. And then we'd leave, and one of the teachers, particularly in primary, one of the teachers would accidentally slip out that they played trombone once when they were 5, and they were made music coordinator. And they were kind of like, okay, I'll try that then. And actually that metaphor of driving with the brakes on works so powerfully, because then those people go, I've no idea what I'm doing. So they ask for this outside help, and they spend a lot of money doing that. And I do wonder sometimes whether we're in that position of, you are the teacher in charge of, or the person in charge of teacher improvement within the school, and they very similarly they go, oh, I don't know what to do, and then we start looking for outside expertise, and they start spending thousands on consultants, and it becomes this kind of, well, you said this amorphous blob that was broken up, and then people are just grabbing for these tiny bits to try and put a bit of identity on. And I do wonder if that's a bit of a similar situation that some schools will be finding themselves in.
I would think so. And I think, it's a problem with the system because there's a lot of schools and it's a very, very hard thing teaching. So, in any kind of wicked system like education or healthcare and that, you're going to have this problem. How do you get enough qualified and experienced people? And especially given the journey that teacher recruitment's been on in the last decade or so, if you've got a teacher with 5 years experience, that's a real godsend, but I think it's interesting, how is our focus on the method that we coach becoming more important than the content of the conversation. And that's the thing I think that's really interesting.
I think you make a really good point there. I think there's a couple of really interesting things to pick up on. The first one would be, like, I'm interested in that distinction that you made actually between instructional coaching and like cognitive coaching. So to give her flowers on that one. So that was Sarah's term that she came up with was cognitive coaching. But we would say that, I think if you pushed us on it, we would say that cognitive coaching is very much, it's a form of instructional coaching. It's just instructional coaching that really aims to get to decision making, because we believe that decision making sits at the heart of adaptive expertise. But I'm interested about the distinctions that you make, and what it kind of prompts me to think is maybe the helpful and useful distinctions to make between these different types of coaching are not necessarily what they do, as in like the structures of them, or the fact that you ask these type of questions here and these type of questions there. Maybe it's more about like the actual goal of the coaching. So is there a type of coaching that is, and I think probably similar to you, I've done my level 5 executive coaching qualification, and been through all of that, and I always kind of thought that throughout that kind of executive coaching model was more about helping somebody find clarity in the decisions that they're going to make, but kind of in a static moment. So make a decision about what you're going to do next. Now tomorrow, go and actually like enact those decisions, and see what happens as a result of those decisions, and then we come back together. Instructional coaching to me has always been far more about preparing you to make the decisions in the moment. So rather than let's make them now and then enact them, let's give you the mindset that you then make the decision, the right decision, the best decision, whatever that might be, in the moment of teaching. But then is there a strand of instructional coaching that focuses more on actually this is about execution technique, and another strand that focuses more on the development of decision making? And do both of those two types have goals that are both in different circumstances equally as useful? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, if we think back to like what is it, Sims's systematic review and things like that happened, that kind of really helped launch it. The Work Ambition did, and we look at the models. I think instructional coaching as a term, because of the nature of the ECF or whatever it's called now, I think they've changed the name of it again. But the teacher training and teacher development framework, ITT, that's the ECF, and it seems really well suited to taking novices to a position of kind of relative expertise, in a very, very short frame of time, whether it's focused on deliberate practice, it's focused on, identifying tangible kind of granular improvement at a ready pace. But we know that when we do that with more experienced members of staff, we run into problems, which is where I think, you and Sarah's work on cognitive coaching is really, really strong, because and Josh's approach to kind of looking at the mental, I don't think he calls them mental models, but the different ways, the strength of people's ideas, I think change drivers or something he calls it.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Change catalysts and
change catalysts. That's
another way. Anyway. Another way of looking at mental models. You're right.
Yeah. And that idea of having people being able to, just that coaching concept that comes from kind of the executive coaching, leadership coaching side, that pure coaching side of like asking first, kind of works much better maybe with more experienced staff, because while it may not give you good access to the truth, because people are terrible judges of their own performance in general, at least it stops them feeling like there's barriers to change. And I think for me, that's the really interesting thing. The whole point of when I wrote Unlocking Teacher Development was this idea that I would visit 2 schools within a month, and they would both say they were doing the same thing, essentially, like they were, a step lab school or a walkthrough school or whatever it was, or they had coaching trios or whatever. And in one of them, it was really clear that it was working. And in the other one, it was really clear it wasn't working. Mm-hmm. Well, if I can have that run, then surely there's something behind the scenes. So that's why I was really focused on being approach agnostic, because it's not really my place to tell people how to improve their schools, because context is so important to these things. But I think it's really interesting that what we're trying to do at the moment is kind of problem solve that knowing doing gap. But often we ignore the person in that process.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, like with the level 5, and I'm trying to do the paperwork for level 7 at the moment. When you really work with people that are full-time leadership coaches and they talk about their philosophy, for all intents and purposes, it's cheap therapy. That's essentially where it ends up at. That's where the kind of really superb ones go, because they have to move beyond T-Grow or Oscar or whatever model they have, because that's not always going to be there, because half the people coming to them are coming to them because they don't know what the problem is. And trying to find that problem is really, really important, which is, I think, why like senior leaders and middle leaders value that kind of coaching in their kind of leadership approach so much, because it allows them. I mean, you posted it like coming to terms with the decision. I always think of it like that, more like they already kind of know what they want to do. If we believe the work, of Jonathan Haidt and the idea of kind of the moral responsibility and then the post hoc rationalization of why we're doing it, it's more about them coming to terms with the decision they've already made, in a kind of matrix style approach, I suppose. Sorry, old reference. But whereas when we're dealing with teachers, all we really need to do is diffuse their initial resistance in some way, shape, or form to make them open to that feedback. And, culture can do that. Culture can short circuit everyone. I know someone that leads teaching and learning in a school, and they give feedback via email. And that feedback is perfectly well accepted by the school. The teachers don't have any problem receiving feedback via email from them, because they're great and they have this amazing culture they've managed to establish in their small school where everyone trusts each other. And so they can just go, oh, next time do this, and if you need help, let me know. And that works. But if you rolled that out in every other school in the country, it's going to fail 9 times out of 10 probably.
But I think what's interesting there is like that. Okay, so yeah, those teachers have accepted it then, and there's a culture there that means that they accept it in the spirit with which it's intended. But then I guess my push on that would be, what about the research that suggests that like putting 2 people in the same room talking about teaching is a big what's the word? Is a fundamental ingredient of what actually helps teachers to improve. And actually there's some evidence there that suggests that if all you ever do is just put teachers in front of each other to talk to each other, that's better than an awful lot of other stuff you could potentially do. Is there not a case there that then that school that has the feedback via email culture, even though everybody's acceptant of it, is there not an argument to say that actually you might be able to shift practice even better if you put those 2 people who trust each other in a room together and gave them the space to talk about it in even more depth?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I'm not saying that's definitely the right way to do it, but I just think it's fascinating how there are so many variables in the process. Yeah. And, that research has high surface validity to me. I'm personally, my job's really nice because I'm not on the senior leadership team, but I get to kind of input into teaching and learning in my school. So I train the people that train the teachers, basically. That's one of my key things. So I'll visit, different subjects and different days and go into lessons, trainee teachers, experienced teachers, teachers that have come back from absence, whatever it is. And I'll visit them and I'll, give them some positive feedback, like automatically through the system as we record our visits. And then I'll send them an email that says, thanks for having me. And then they've got an access to my calendar where they can book them in for 15 minutes feedback. And I always say to them, like, if you're interested in having a conversation, book in a time that's suitable to you. Because one, if I force people, there's going to be some people that are going to come into the room and not be ready for that feedback because they actually didn't want it right now. They're too busy and things like that. But if I don't offer it, then how are they ever going to understand the context of my feedback, and how are they ever going to get to the next step? And I get about 90% of people book in for feedback, and it's really nice conversations because it establishes, the purpose of the conversation before we have it. I used to be one of those people that used to think, oh, I've got to give this feedback as on my to-do list. I know I'll just pop my head in the door, and quick drive-by feedback, get the job done, tick it off. And I've seen, like, firsthand, when I visit schools, that is just absolutely catastrophic when it comes to culture and the climate of schools. But this is, that problem with implementing any coaching model. I think people massively underestimate how difficult it is to do it well, like, and do the calculation of how many coaches do you need if you want your 60 teachers to be seen once a fortnight, just the physical time to see a teacher for 15 minutes, give them feedback for 10 minutes or whatever it is. You add that up, you're looking at 10 coaches maybe, or something like that, because then they're going to be teaching as well. It's like quite a challenge to actually implement at that scale.
And I suppose that leads us on to that next question, really, which is that, to what extent is scalability like a fundamental challenge with coaching, and where are you seeing that, if at all, like, cracked, and if not, like, what do you think the ways are that we could do it?
I think the secret is having realistic expectations.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm, like, coaching assistant head teachers that lead on teaching and learning, we'll often start with, like, what are your 3 targets on your improvement plan? Just get to know each other. We're really interested we're working on these 3 things this year. Okay. And then I just kind of always interested to see how they respond. I just go, okay, so let's say we're only going to do one of them this year. Which one would it be? Because the other 2 probably aren't going to get done, because it's really hard to do just one thing well. It's really hard to embed that one thing. And so I think scalability is one of those really interesting problems with coaching. You probably want to think of it over a 3-4 year journey instead of over a kind of, we're going to put coaching in this year. You want to start with, first of all, getting one person who's leading on it to really understand it, go and visit some schools that do it, witness the problems firsthand so they can avoid them. And then you want to, get 5 people, maybe co-coaching to build up their experience. It's more than just step 1, do an inset day. Step 2, send 15 people on a coaching 1-day course, via a reputable brand. And then step 3, profit. It's a challenge, I think. And then you've got this problem of attrition, because if you're thinking 3 or 4 years, well, then you probably need to pencil in, you're going to lose 10 or 20% of your coaches just to standard kind of, what they call it now, romantically they call it churn, I think, in the churn of staff.
Yeah,
we love our teachers in education. But, you're going to have to plan for that strategically. If you're going to do implementation, you need to start thinking to yourself, okay, so actually I need to start 12. I need to train 12 because I need 10 at a minimum. And I need to kind of have, when I start noticing that person that's ECT year 2 that's a bit keen, how do I create a succession plan for them to kind of move into my my team of coaches? How do I line manage all those coaches? Do I offer supervision? Depending on the type of coaching model you want to use. It can get quite big quite soon, which is fine if that's the thing you're doing. The problem is schools are doing this on top of, weekly subject CPD and, I don't know, research learning communities or inquiry based, projects and things like that. And if you start putting all those things in together, sooner or later, you're probably not achieving any of them at a particularly high level, I would think.
That is, like, everything you've said there is just wholly sensible. And I think, like, that doesn't sound like a particularly effusive word, but I think, like, that's a real compliment in education, that you can come up with something as sensible as that. And I think everything you're saying there, like, the key thing, I'm interested in hearing what Chris thinks about this as well, because working in a smaller setting, I guess the temptation can be to try and accelerate that implementation really much faster. But I think what you're saying there as well is around when people look at implementation, it's not just the steps that you need to go through to go, okay, I can do that. I've done that step of implementation, on to the next step. It's thinking about the timescales that sit in between them, and not thinking about implementation necessarily in like neat term blocks and then like neat 1 year blocks as well. But actually, if we take 4 years, if we want to get 30 teachers across a school coaching or being coached, let's take 3 years to do that, and really build up slowly, so that at each point of moving on to that next step, whenever we iterate that, we've got time and space to work out what the inevitable issues are, to work out how to solve those issues, then let that stage embed, then look at what the next step might be. It takes much longer, but it's, if you can apply that patience to it, I agree. I think it's wholly sensible.
I will say one thing. When you go slow, one of the benefits is you establish a lot more strong ties in your system. So you get a lot more redundancy and therefore a lot more chance of people actually making permanent change to the way they work. Because, a lot of things can be introduced, but often they fade. And I think quite flippantly, I was talking about that the other day. I was, what's the thing you started in September, which is already fading away, because that's probably gone for the year, because you can't revisiting stuff doesn't really make sense. And I often say, like, no CPD is better than bad CPD, because once you fired that shot, and if it hasn't landed, then you're absolutely take it from my own mistakes. Once it missed its mark, you're not getting it back quickly. You're not putting the genie back in the bottle, because staff now have awareness. And awareness is an absolute killer for kind of teacher development, because they just switch off because they think they already know the answer, which is not their fault, it's ours, but, is a real problem.
I think one of the good things about the Walkthroughs coaching book is that it does give quite a lot of thought to how you might take that coaching element and time it, or how you might have some kind of iterative cycle. I think though there's a lot to be said for schools being scared of trying something new. So we're looking at gentle implementation of coaching within my school. Is going to take years. We've spent about a year on kind of shared language, and we're just about beginning to drip some kind of group ideas in before we kind of move into anything that's more individual. And we're looking at some curriculum tweaks, and we're sat there going, if we're going to tweak this curriculum, what are Ofsted going to say? Because, every time you put something new in, it'll be spoken about negatively. You'd rarely read an Ofsted inspection report that says school are implementing this new curriculum. It's early days and we think it's going to be brilliant. It just goes, well, it's early days, so that requires improvement, or, and so schools are scared to implement something that's big and hugely changeful. Just invented a word there, but we know what I mean, because they don't want to be accused of not having something that's fully developed. Therefore, you have this opposite effect where people go, oh, I've read this book, I've been to this conference, we need to do coaching, we need to do it now, quick offset, so let's make it look as if it's been implemented for ages. So we're just going to go straight for the top, we're going to go straight for this, and we always pick on it, and it's like a really poor cousin, and I'm so sorry, cousin cold calling, but it's the easiest thing to do, because it's so widely misunderstood. And I know, people like Adam Boxer, and talk about it quite a lot in terms of changing different names. But teachers see that, leaders go, right, everyone do 6 bits of cold calling every single lesson. Officer going to come in. It's really, really clear that we are doing this thing, and everybody does it, so it's really cool. It's codified across the school. And what they miss out on is that thing you were talking about, the time, the courage to sit down and go, we're going to implement this thing for our school because it's right for our context, as you said with the whole emailing thing. It's right for our culture. And I think schools are scared to take the time because they're going to be criticised for it along the way. So they go for these quick fixes that are actually doing more damage than good. The amount of teachers we hear from, they get in touch with us at EduPulse, or they get in touch with Adam and I through our different channels and different things we do, and they just go, I'm like, the leadership have absolutely no idea. They're just coming in, they're telling me to do this. Listen to your recent episode with Adam Boxer's podcast and Adam and Amy's podcast. You were talking about that kind of idea of middle leadership. And these middle leaders, as well, they're being crushed. They just go make them do this, make them do this. And the teachers, I hear from them, they're going, they've no idea. They don't come in my classroom. They don't understand. They don't know my kids. And because we're going for these quick fixes, I think we're losing so much. And as a result, nobody knows what the hell coaching is, because people just go and coach. You'll be good at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, isn't it? Leaders, in some ways, I have sympathy for them. I try to not run a deficit model. And I try to make sure that I understand they're just people in a context. But sometimes it does really feel like the things that you think are important as like a kind of, a teacher in the classroom, and the things that they see important are very, very different. And I think that's part of the system. We're very, very high accountability system compared to most places in the world. And there are problems with that. And this is kind of one of them, that people feel under a huge amount of pressure to make broad sweeping changes very quickly. I was speaking to someone from the Republic of Ireland last Thursday. We were having a coaching chat about they just set up a network of cognitive science training in 5 schools within their local area. And this is the first piece of non-state provided training that's been offered as far as anyone can remember in the whole area. So there are pros and cons to both sides. Stability can breed, a bit of a kind of lack of ambition, but we've got to be careful that we don't push it too hard, to squeeze too much, and end up breaking everyone in the process, I suppose.
Okay, so we talked a little bit then about like the importance of culture, and how important it is that whatever you're implementing, be it coaching or anything else, is well matched to the culture, or at least well implemented alongside or within the culture that you've got. So I want to try and get into really like your thoughts on the extent to which coaching should or does develop decision making rather than just action, right? Because I think we've all probably come across places and spoken to people who their experience of coaching and teacher development has been a case of, well, here's a recipe for how to do a particular move, or a recipe for how to deliver a lesson, and you just got to learn these rules, apply those rules, and you'll be doing a good thing all of the time, and so good things will happen as a result. But we've got this contention around that, and this feeling that actually decision making has to be baked into developing anything that we're doing around professional development, because without the decision making, we're not going to get teachers doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. I'm just keen to get your thoughts on that, really, like what the place of decision making is in coaching as you see it, and how best to develop it.
I think is absolutely crucial. I'm speaking honestly, I think the work that you and Sarah have done is the kind of idea, when you first revealed it, that I was like, I wish I'd written that down, because I think it's a really, really succinct way of describing an effective process. Now, I haven't read every coaching cut blog, and I haven't seen the book or anything like that, but just as the basic concept of unpicking what the person's goal, the intended goal was, and then comparing and contrasting that to the process they went through, and using a kind of third area of focus here that's not the two people, like I use a mini whiteboard or not. So one of the things that really informs my practice in general is my father was a therapist. He was a Gestalt solution-focused therapist in a secondary school. And so, dealing with teachers and dealing with students and things like that, I have quite a therapeutic angle, I would say, to the way I look at problems. I tend to look at the emotional side of it before I look at the kind of practical side of it, maybe naturally. So I think this idea is really powerful, because what you say is really important. If you don't change the decisions, but I think there's something more crucial behind that point of view. Most teachers spend 90% of their life in isolation. When that door is closed, it doesn't matter what external accountability system you have in place. You can try and use fear to motivate them that you might walk in the door one day unannounced, but at the end of the day, if we're not looking at the underlying decision-making process that's going on, providing they have the knowledge. So maybe new teachers and things like that, they don't have that knowledge. They'll just be trying to guess what we think. then it's amazing how easily they can dissect the situation and, you know, come up with rational explanations about why they could have done things differently. So I think it's absolutely crucial, to be honest with you, because we are essentially on our own most of the time with the students, and we have to kind of make decisions in the moment that there's no perfect answer to a lot of them. There's shades of gray to things, you know, optimization and things. And when you're in those situations, I think a kind of decision making analysis approach is definitely one of the most useful ones.
Yeah, I think your third point of contact idea as well is one that I think is probably not appreciated widely enough yet. But yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we find when I find whenever I'm coaching someone, I'm mapping out what happened, or mapping out a solution to the situation that we've identified. It's kind of like outsourcing their working memory to this third point, which then means you can just go so much deeper into your discussion about any one of those points at any given time. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on to highlight the importance of that.
And I think, again, leaning on the emotional side again, it goes further than that. So therapists will use this because having a face-to-face conversation is threatening. You know, marriage counselors will stick their partners back to back so that they can speak freely without feeling of judgment. Because humans tend to instinctively, the words we're going to say, we tend to predict how we think the person's going to react. It's like a key part of our social brain. And so by removing our focus from that person's micro expressions, we're much more likely to speak honestly and openly. And we're not trying to solve us now. The problem is not me, the person. The problem is what happened in the lesson. And not for every teacher. Like, there are some teachers that are like super, you know, open to feedback and very, very robust individuals. But for people like me that are touchy prima donnas, talking about the object and not the person helps me separate from that. And it reduces some of my barriers to hearing the feedback. And that's, you know, another reason why I think it's so powerful.
Do you know, sorry, Chris, I know you're going to jump in a sec as well, but I just love that the way that you fusing together that very person-centered approach with that kind of more performance-centered approach. That's what like knowledge-based approach, I guess. Like you're really thinking about how those two things can come together, because in the act of coaching, in the moment when you're trying to help somebody improve, those two things do come together. There's nothing you can do about it. Like, the person that is receiving that feedback is a person, so they're going to have to that's going to be received and filtered through that emotional lens. So I think you're absolutely right to kind of embrace that rather than to sort of sideline it and ignore it and hope it doesn't interfere too much. It's such a brilliant point.
I think it's key as well, because I love the fact you were talking, Adam, about your dad as a Gestalt therapist. That kind of the whole being present and the here and now and thinking about yourself. I think when you can project that onto the person you are talking to or the person you're coaching, at the end of the day, as much as we try, and I really do believe this, the vast majority of people out there teaching, and let's say 99.9%, don't get up in the morning to do a bad job. They don't get up in the morning to go to school to be bad teachers, or to be poor role models, or to do anything heinous or despicable. The vast majority are out to do the very best they can for the kids in front of them, and too often coaches can be in a position of, here's what you did wrong and here's how we're going to fix it, and the teacher could be sat there not thinking they're doing anything wrong, in quotation that marks. They're there doing their very best, and to be able to put their experience at the heart of it, to make sure that you aren't outwardly insulting them by going, by the way, this conversation is on how you are going to get better because you're not good enough yet. And if there isn't a culture of improvement, or there isn't a culture of everybody just wanting to be better, then I think that's a really dangerous place to be. So your point, I think, speaks to the heart of it, and that's certainly where I've come from when doing Coaching Unpacked with Adam and Sarah, is that, kind of coming up with some of these more higher order thinking about how to do it. It's trying to bring it back to the person in the room. I've got 15 minutes in my lunch break, 10 minutes I'm spending it with you. I'm going to want to be motivated and lifted up, not told what I did wrong, because I know. And if I don't know, then I'm hoping the coach is going to be empathetic enough to be able to carry me through that in a way that isn't going to destroy me for the rest of the day and undo any work they're trying to do. So I think the point you make is actually fundamental and runs the risk of creating another form of coaching.
Please don't.
I'm trying to think of one to wind you up. It'll come to me. I'm just going to sit here for a couple of seconds and have a think.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think what's really fascinating about everything that we've kind of spoken about there is that it's coaching, although it can be as simple and it is as simple as helping. What it also is this like quite complex mesh of different things, different goals, different aims, like also quite often different realities as well, because the reality that we perceive as the coach is often very different from the reality that we perceive as the teacher or the leader. And I think trying to bring those two realities together is a big central challenge of coaching. And I think what I've taken a lot from certainly the second half of this conversation is that it's very much about, if you want to get to that person's experience of reality, you're going to have to go through their emotional filter, because that's often how they receive and interpret that reality environment. So I think what's so interesting about this is that just how complex it is, both in how it's received by the teacher, but also in terms of understanding what your goals are as the coach. So at the same time as it being like uniquely simple, it's also deeply complex as well. So yeah, Chris, did you have anything you wanted to ask Adam just to wrap up at all?
Well, Adam, I'm just wondering, kind of from your position, what do you think is going to be the next big challenge on the horizon, and what do you think we can do to anticipate its imminent incursion on our shores?
I think, well, obviously we've got on the horizon, the kind of looming hulk of curriculum reform. And I found it really fascinating how, like, schools are already starting to change. Like, I heard someone saying that because of the rumored framework that was that, the kind of very broad bones that really said like, oh, we've got to start curriculum reform straight up. I'm like, my daughter is in year 7 and she will not be affected by the changes. They've actually been very sensible and been like, we have this runway, but schools are so scared because historically we have no runway. That you can see them starting to panic and start to try. So I think our biggest problem we're going to face is ourselves, and our kind of Stockholm syndrome of reforms of the past kind of coming back to haunt us like some sort of Christmas carol of curriculum reform and oracy implementation plans. And we actually have a chance now, hopefully, if they give us enough information early on, to actually do some strategic thinking and some budgetary considerations, because secondary schools might be in for quite a bit of staffing changes if some of the proposed ideas regarding kind of the way schools are measured changes. It might mean that there's a heck of a lot of people training to be dance teachers all of a sudden or something. And so, we actually have a chance to do it properly, hopefully, with a nice runway. But I feel like we won't. We'll just go crazy because we're so used to being crazy and living in a, instead of being like a proper hospital, we're like Scrubs, where everything is just like a little bit crazy, a little bit zany. And everyone's just in a little bit of a panic mode because they're always worried about being late to the party. So I think that's probably the thing I'll sit back and watch out of my corner of my eye, just, what are people getting up to, in the name of curriculum reform, and, what are people getting leaflets in their, inbox about, get ready for the new inspection framework, just buy this webinar for £400 or whatever. And then people fall in for that. So I think, the cynic in me is like, that's the next thing. That's the next thing that's going to be a real big issue for us.
No, I don't think it's cynical. I think it's insightful because we're recording this episode in late November, which means it's nearly the end of term, which means on Friday at 5 p.m. on the last day of the Christmas term, we're all going to get an email from DFE with the latest news, things to implement live in school, but everyone's closed for 2 weeks. So I don't actually think you're wrong.
I mean, God knows what's going to happen with the breakfast clubs and work experience, because I think both of those things maybe have been slightly underestimated by central government in terms of how challenging both are to implement at a school level. But we'll find out, I suppose.
We will, and hopefully they're listening to this. We know there's a couple of cheeky DFE ears that listen to this, so maybe anyone from DFE, if listening, Adam Robbins has got his crystal ball, and he's going to be sitting on a beach sipping a cocktail of "I told you so," unless you give him a call. Adam, it's been an absolute delight to have you on the podcast today. So Adam's two major books. So we've got Middle Leadership Mastery and Unlocking Teacher Potential. They're both out on Unlocking Teacher Development and Their Potential. They're on Amazon, and they're independently published and just brilliant. And I think that's really inspirational. So please, if you're interested in the work that Adam does, grab those two books. Also follow him on X and follow some of his really, really interesting and thought-provoking and thought-pushing ideas, because Adam, you certainly have pushed our thinking, and the conversations Adam and Sarah and I have had prior to recording any of our cognitive our coaching unpacked episodes have always been what's Adam Robbins saying, and not has he reacted.
Don't feel terrible.
No, it's so important. Otherwise, because people just anybody can do a podcast these days. You can sit in a silo and create some content, but it's really nice to get the pushback. So thank you for that, and thank you for being such a great guest today.
That's also why sorry, Chris. That's also why we founded EduPulse, right? It was all about like broadening the conversation. It wasn't about let's develop our own echo chamber. So it genuinely is great when people like clearly think that it's worth engaging in the conversation with us. I agree or disagree. So yeah, seriously, Adam, we're super grateful for all of the interaction and for this evening as well.
Thank you to everybody out there listening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much. This has been From the Chalkface with EduPulse, and we'll catch you next time.